I worked with Whitney Houston. Her last recording, the one about Mariah Carey, it still haunts me. What should have been a simple session turned into something far darker, something I didn't understand at the time. That recording, it wasn't just a song, it was a warning. A secret no one wanted to admit, but it's something that changed everything I thought I knew about the music industry. And now, I can't escape it. The price of fame, it's not what they tell you. I'd heard the stories. We all did. The legends, the superstars, their lives were bigger than anything we could imagine. But when I walked into that studio for the first time, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Whitney Houston. The name alone was enough to make your heart race. Her voice, untouchable, legendary. But the woman I met was different. I thought I was going to meet a diva, someone used to the spotlight, someone hardened by years of fame. Instead, I found someone fragile, distant. She greeted me with a forced smile, but her eyes, they weren't the eyes of a superstar. There was something else behind them, something haunted. I couldn't quite place it at first, but it was there. The closer I got, the more I realized. She wasn't just the icon everyone saw on stage. No, Whitney was trapped in a world that was much darker than anyone outside the industry could ever imagine. At first, I thought maybe it was just the pressures of fame catching up to her. The constant spotlight, the expectations, the rumors. Everyone thinks the price of fame is just sleepless nights and endless interviews. But no, it's not. That's the easy part. The real price? It's the soul-crushing weight of being owned by something much bigger than yourself. I began to notice the subtle changes in Whitney as the sessions went on. She'd stop mid-song, as if she couldn't find the words. She'd shift uncomfortably in her seat when certain names were mentioned. Names of producers, other artists, executives. The whole environment felt tense, suffocating. At first, I told myself it was just nerves, or maybe the pressure of making her final album. But as I watched her closely, I realized this wasn't just normal studio anxiety. Every time we worked together, it felt like someone was watching us, like there was an invisible presence in the room, pushing us towards something darker. Whitney's behavior began to change, too. The laughs became fewer, the smiles more forced. The energy that once radiated from her was slowly being drained, piece by piece, and I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just physical exhaustion. It was like something was sucking the life out of her. I'd seen it before in other stars, but nothing quite like this. One day, after a particularly tense session, she pulled me aside. The others had left the room, and I thought it was just a moment of respite, a chance to talk about the music. But Whitney wasn't talking about music. She looked at me with these eyes. Eyes that seemed to carry a weight that no one should bear. "You have no idea what they make us do," she whispered. I thought she was joking at first, but the tremble in her voice said otherwise. She turned away, her face pale. "You can leave. You should leave, before it gets you too." I wasn't sure what she meant, but I shrugged it off. Artists say strange things when they're under pressure, right? But that wasn't just the usual life is hard talk. There was fear in her voice, real deep fear. It hit me then that Whitney Houston, this untouchable legend, wasn't free. She wasn't just a prisoner to fame or addiction. No, she was bound by something else entirely. Something that controlled her every move. And I was now a part of it. I could feel it. Something had changed, but that was just the beginning. There was something much darker lurking beneath the surface, something I wasn't prepared for, and it was coming for all of us. A few weeks into my time working with Whitney, I started hearing rumors. At first, they seemed like just that. Rumors. You know, the kind of gossip that floats around in any industry. But the longer I spent in the music world, the more I realized these weren't just idle stories. They were warnings. And I didn't even know to be afraid yet. It was one of those nights when I had to stay late at the studio. Whitney had left for the night, and most of the crew had cleared out. I was gathering my things, heading toward the exit, when I was stopped by a producer I didn't recognize. He was older, in his 50s, maybe early 60s. He had the kind of look that told you he had been around forever, seen everything, done everything. He had a powerful air about him, the kind of person who doesn't have to speak to command respect. "Need a drink?" he asked, nodding toward a private office in the back of the building. It was a strange request, considering I didn't know him, but I was young, still trying to find my place in this world, so I nodded and followed him in. The room was dimly lit, with an air of secrecy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He poured a glass of whiskey and handed it to me. As I took the glass, he sat down behind a desk, watching me closely, his eyes sharp. There was a stillness to him, like he knew things about the world that most people couldn't even begin to comprehend. "We don't get many people around here who aren't already in the loop," he said, almost too casually. "You're not one of them, are you?" I wasn't sure what he meant, but before I could answer, he continued. "You've been working with Whitney, right?" He didn't wait for me to respond. "You know the stories, the ones they never tell you, about how this place, this industry, works." I wasn't sure how to respond. I had heard whispers, things about the real power behind the music world, the stuff that wasn't in the glossy magazines or talked about on TV, but I had no idea how deep this went. And I definitely wasn't ready to hear what he was about to say. "Whitney's a legend," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping low. "But legends don't just happen. They're made. And when you're made, you don't get to choose how it happens." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You're part of the system. We own you." I was about to ask what he meant when he interrupted. "You're here now, aren't you? That's why you're listening to me. You're in it, whether you realize it or not." His words hit me harder than I expected, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. He wasn't done. "This business doesn't run on talent, kid. It runs on power, real power." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, ornate book. The leather cover was worn and old, like something from another time. "This?" He held it up. "This is part of the deal. You make your career, you make your name, and you get to stay on top. But there's a price you can't ever pay back." I stared at him, unsure what to say. His eyes never left mine as he slid the book across the desk. People think they just have to work hard, make good music, and everything will fall into place. But that's a lie. They don't tell you about the other side. The side where you sign your soul away. And Whitney, she's already paid hers. But not everyone gets out of the game the way she did. My heart started pounding. I tried to hide my unease, but the more he spoke, the more I realized this wasn't just idle talk. He was serious. and the weight of what he was saying settled on me like a thick fog I couldn't escape. This book, it's not just a metaphor, kid. It's a ledger. It tracks every price paid, every deal made. You know what Whitney's last song about Mariah is? It's part of the payment. Every legend has their deal, and every deal has an end. The glass in my hand felt heavier, like I was holding something that could shatter if I wasn't careful. I had heard rumors about the cost of fame before, but this was different. This was real, and it made my skin crawl. "Don't get me wrong," he said, watching me carefully. "You can make it in this business, but it's not about being the best. It's about who you know, and more importantly, what you're willing to give. You don't have a choice once you're in." Whitney didn't have a choice. Neither will you. I couldn't breathe. The weight of his words hung heavy in the room. I wanted to run, to get out of there as fast as possible, but something held me in place, an invisible force that kept my feet rooted to the floor. People think they want this life, the fame, the fortune, the power, but they don't know what it costs, what it really costs. He stood up, moving toward the door. "You'll see soon enough. We all pay our dues sooner or later. And trust me, kid, you don't want to know how high the price is." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving me alone in that dark room. I stared at the book, the weight of what he'd said sinking in. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just an introduction to the business. This was my warning, and I wasn't ready for what would come next. But the truth was darker than I could have imagined. The deeper I looked, the more I realized there was no escape. Whitney had already made her choice, and I was about to make mine. It was a few days after that conversation with the producer, and something about the studio felt different. A quiet unease had settled in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching something I wasn't supposed to see. Whitney was back in the studio, alone, with just a handful of people around. The rest of the staff was scattered around the building, but the energy was all wrong. Everyone moved with a sense of urgency, as if they were waiting for something to happen. I could tell by the way they acted that this wasn't a regular recording session. This was it. The moment where everything would change. I had no idea what Whitney had been through in the last few months of her life, but I could see it in her face. She was tired, emotionally drained, like something inside her had been slowly slipping away. Her smile was forced, her movements sluggish, but she pushed through. Her voice still powerful, still commanding, still capable of shaking the room. I wasn't supposed to be in the studio that night, but I found myself standing in the back corner, watching from the shadows as Whitney started to record. It wasn't supposed to be anything out of the ordinary. Just another track for her final album. But the moment she stepped up to the mic, I could feel something shift. The song was supposed to be about Mariah Carey. The industry had hyped it up as the ultimate diva showdown. Two legends, one song. The kind of drama the tabloids loved to feed on. But as soon as the track began, I knew this was not just about rivalry. It was something much darker. Her voice trembled on the first few notes, not from age or fatigue, but from something deeper, something more primal. She stopped after the first few lines, her eyes wide, confused. The producer, a veteran in the industry, stood on the other side of the glass, giving her a reassuring nod, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He looked like a man who had seen a million takes go wrong. But this one was different. He was anxious. "Is everything okay, Whitney?" the producer asked, his voice soft. She didn't respond right away. She just stared at the mic like she was seeing it for the first time. Finally, she spoke. I can't do this. Not like this. Something feels off." The producer tried to ease her, telling her it was just nerves. "You've done this 1,000 times, just take a deep breath." But there was something else in her eyes, something I couldn't name. It wasn't just fear, it was dread. A deep, suffocating sense of dread. And as much as she tried to convince herself to continue, I saw her hesitate. She took a deep breath and began again. But this time, it was different. She wasn't just singing. It was like she was speaking, telling a story. Her voice wavered as she sang about Mariah, but it wasn't just about a rivalry. There were other layers, darker layers hidden beneath the surface. The words she spoke, they were like warnings, cryptic and jagged, slipping through the lines of the song, buried in metaphors, but I felt them hit with an undeniable force. "And she'll take it all," Whitney sang, her voice trembling but powerful. "But it's a price she'll never understand." I couldn't tell if she was speaking about Mariah anymore, or if she was speaking about herself. It was as if the lines between reality and the song were blurring, and the words weren't just lyrics. They were truths. Terrifying truths she wasn't ready to face, but couldn't escape. The tension in the studio grew unbearable. The producer stepped into the booth, his face a mask of concern. "Whitney, just focus. Focus on the song, please." But Whitney's expression shifted to something else. Something wild, desperate. She wasn't just recording anymore. She was pleading. "It's not just the music. It's the game. The price. The price you pay to stay on top," she whispered. The producer froze, clearly not expecting that. "What do you mean, Whitney?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with something I couldn't place. I paid everything they asked. I've given everything. But it's not enough. They'll never let me go, and they won't let her go either. Not like they promised." I could feel the room tightening, the walls closing in, as if we were all suffocating on the weight of her words. The producer stepped back slowly, looking at me through the glass. His face was pale, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't the only one who had seen the change in Whitney. She turned back to the mic, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't ask for this. None of us did. But we're all part of it now." The final lines came out low, almost like a chant. "And they'll take it all. They'll take everything you have until there's nothing left but a shell." It wasn't just a song, it was a warning. And the more she sang, the more I realized that Whitney's life, her career, everything she had built, wasn't hers. It had been given away in exchange for something far darker than anyone had realized. She wasn't singing about Mariah. She was singing about the price of fame, about the sacrifices she had been forced to make, and the terrifying reality that no one ever leaves the game once they're in it. The room fell silent after she finished. No one moved, no one spoke. The weight of the moment was too heavy to process. I could feel the dread in the air, thick and suffocating. I knew I wasn't the only one who understood the gravity of what had just happened, but we couldn't say anything. We couldn't acknowledge it because acknowledging it meant seeing it, and seeing it meant we were part of it too. Whitney looked around the room, her eyes haunted. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. I've paid everything they wanted." I watched her break in that moment, her vulnerability seeping through. The diva, the legend, the voice, gone. In its place stood a woman who had been broken by the system she was part of, and I realized then, her last recording wasn't just a song about Mariah Carey. It was a message that none of us were ready for. But that wasn't the end of it. Whitney's recording wasn't just a final cry for help. It was the beginning of something much darker, something that would consume all of us if we didn't get out in time. The days following Whitney's last recording were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted. The air in the studio had thickened, and the conversations I overheard between producers, managers, and execs began to sound less like business and more like whispers of something else, something deadly. At first, I thought I was just imagining things, but the more I listened, the more I realized the music industry wasn't just about making hits. It was about deals, soul-crushing, life-draining deals. I started paying closer attention to the people around me. They were all part of the machine, the ones who controlled everything behind the curtain. They weren't just producers or executives. They were gatekeepers of an unseen world, a world where power wasn't measured in record sales or chart-topping hits, but in something far darker. And I was starting to understand the cost of being in it. One night, after a session, I found myself alone in the studio. It was late, the lights dimmed, and the rest of the crew had gone home. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me. Something I had to see, something I had to understand. I didn't know where it came from, but I was suddenly consumed by an overwhelming urge to go into the back offices, into the places I'd never been allowed before. The higher-ups, those who ran the studio, kept their offices locked away, guarded like they were hiding something. And that night, I was determined to find out what. The hallway was dark and silent, but I could hear the low hum of voices coming from the end of the corridor. They were talking about her. About Whitney. It was hard to make out the words at first, but then I heard something that made my blood run cold. "She's paid the price," one voice said. The tone wasn't sympathetic. It was clinical. "She's served her time. She's given everything she has. But she's not going to be the last." The second voice was calm, almost bored, as if this was a routine conversation. I moved closer, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. The voices continued. "She's lucky. Most never get the chance to retire. Most burn out long before their time is up, and when they do, we own what's left of them. We control the after." I froze. The after. What the hell were they talking about? As I pressed my ear against the door, the conversation shifted. One of the voices, one I recognized as a high-level producer, spoke with an unsettling calm. "You know how it works. We take, we give, and we collect. This business doesn't thrive on talent. It thrives on energy. It's not just money that keeps the wheels turning, it's life." I didn't understand what they meant, but I could feel a cold chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. I stepped back slowly, hoping to leave unnoticed, but I stepped on a loose floorboard. The creak was deafening in the silence, and I knew they'd heard it. I didn't wait to see if they were coming for me. I ran. The next few days were a blur. The unease I felt before was now a suffocating presence, something I couldn't shake. I could see it in everyone's eyes. The way they looked at each other, the subtle nods, the hidden smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They weren't just people working together, they were partners in something dark. They were bound to something more than just the industry they were in it. And now I was too. I spent the next few weeks trying to understand what I had overheard, but the more I dug, the more I realized I was in over my head. The rituals, the sacrifices, they weren't just rumors. They were the foundation of the music business. What I had thought were industry secrets were actually the very lifeblood of the machine. The industry didn't just make stars, it owned them, body and soul. I kept my head down, pretending nothing had changed, but I knew it had. The studio was no longer just a workplace, it was a trap. And the worst part, I had just started to see the way out, but it was already closing. Then came the day I couldn't ignore it anymore. The studio had just wrapped up a long session. It had been another exhausting day of recording, and the crew was tired, ready to call it a night. But as I was packing up, I caught a glimpse of the executive producer walking down the hallway toward one of the back offices. His face was pale, his eyes tired, and there was something in his posture that felt wrong, like he was carrying the weight of something heavy, something he couldn't put down. He disappeared behind the heavy door, but I couldn't help it. My curiosity got the best of me. I had to know what was happening in that office. Slowly, I approached the door, pressing my ear against it, holding my breath. I heard murmurs, too quiet to make out, but then a louder voice broke through. It was unmistakable. "You need to understand," the executive producer said. "Whitney was chosen for this. They all are. We're just the vessels. The industry doesn't just create stars. It consumes them. They live to give, and they die to stay alive. And when they're used up, they fade away, and we take it all." I stepped back, horrified. The truth was staring me in the face. The price of fame wasn't just work. It wasn't just public appearances or being constantly under scrutiny. The real price was the one you couldn't see. The life force that was drained to keep the stars at the top. The next day, Whitney was nowhere to be found. The producer was tight-lipped, but I knew. I knew she was gone. Her voice, her light, had been taken. I wasn't just watching someone's career end. I was watching a soul be consumed by the system. That was the moment I knew I was part of something unseen, something much darker than anything I had ever imagined. The machine wasn't just about music, it was about control. And now, it owned me too. But the truth was far darker than I could have ever known. Whitney had paid the price, and now the system was coming for me. It wasn't just the music anymore. It was everything. And there was no way out. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had overheard. The more I tried to ignore it, the louder the voices in my head became. The conversations, the whispers, it was all connected. And it wasn't just about Whitney. It was about all of us. Once you enter this world, the one where legends are made and stars are controlled, you don't just walk away. You're in it. I thought I could shake off the feeling that something was wrong, but I was wrong. There was no escape, and the more I saw, the more I understood it wasn't just the people in power who were part of it. Everyone, from the lowest assistant to the biggest producers, was tethered to something darker. The industry didn't just thrive on talent or popularity. It thrived on control, on power that no one saw coming. The first real sign that I was being pulled deeper came a week later. It was a late night at the studio again, and I was wrapping up a few final things before heading home. The studio was quiet, almost too quiet, and I found myself standing in front of one of the back rooms, the one no one went into. It was always locked. No one even tried to get in. But that night, there was a strange feeling in the air. It called to me. I knew I shouldn't have gone in, but I couldn't stop myself. My hand reached out, and the door creaked open. Inside was one of the senior producers. He was standing in front of a small desk, scribbling something into a notebook, his back turned. He didn't notice me at first, but I felt the weight of his presence. He was always one of those figures, untouchable, mysterious. You couldn't get too close. He wasn't just a producer. He was part of the system that controlled everything. As I stepped closer, my foot accidentally kicked a pile of papers, and the sound echoed through the room. He turned sharply, his eyes narrowing, his expression suddenly tense. For a split second, it looked like I had caught him in the middle of something he didn't want me to see. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, almost threatening. "This room is off limits." I was just leaving, I stammered, but the words felt hollow as they left my mouth. Something inside me knew I had already crossed the line. He paused, studying me for a moment. Then his lips curled into a slight, cold smile. "You think you know how this business works, don't you?" I didn't answer. "You think it's just about making good music, about being the best." He laughed softly, his eyes darkening. "But that's the easiest part. The hard part is paying the price everyone does, even Whitney." The words hit me like a slap. I had already heard whispers, but this felt like a confession. The truth was seeping out, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. He took a step closer, his voice lowering even more. "The industry isn't just about making stars. It's about controlling them, making them believe they're the ones in charge, when really, they're just following a script. We make them, and we break them, but we don't let them go. Not ever. Not unless they're used up." I froze. His words were too much to process. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "You think they get to walk away? The big names? The legends?" "No," he continued, his voice calm but chilling. "They've given everything they have. And when they're done, we take what's left. We collect. We own them. We always own them." I stood there, my legs heavy, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I was trapped. "Take Whitney," he said, his voice almost too casual. She had her moments, didn't she? A voice like no other. But that wasn't enough. She had to give something more. Something none of us can ever get back. She was part of something bigger than you or me. And when she gave it, she knew it was over. His words didn't make sense, but I understood the underlying meaning. Whitney wasn't just a star. She had been consumed by the industry. She wasn't an icon. She was a product A tool. And when she was no longer useful, the system would discard her and move on to the next. The producer stepped even closer, his face now inches from mine. And you? You think you're different? You think they won't come for you too? The moment you start climbing, you're already in it. You'll be owned. You'll give it all, just like the rest of us. His words were suffocating, like I was being trapped in a web that was impossible to escape from. I didn't ask for this, I muttered, feeling the panic rise. No one does. He chuckled softly, stepping back and turning to the desk. But once you're in, there's no getting out. It's too late for you. It's too late for everyone. There's no freedom. Not anymore. The words burned through my brain as I stumbled backward, feeling sick to my stomach. The walls were closing in. I was no longer just a witness to the destruction. I was becoming part of it. And there was no escape. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out of there. Fast. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something that stopped me cold. Something that made my blood run cold. The notebook on the desk, half open, had a page with names listed. At the top, in bold ink, was Whitney Houston. And beneath it, the word completed was written in large, cold letters. I couldn't help myself. I looked down further. Under her name were other names. Names I recognized and names I didn't. Artists, producers, executives, each with a notation next to their name, completed. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped by the sheer weight of the reality that was unfolding in front of me. I backed out of the room and ran down the hallway, away from the notebook, away from the truth. But no matter how fast I moved, I couldn't escape the feeling that it was already too late. But the worst part, I wasn't the only one who had already been chosen. And what was coming next wasn't just a secret about Whitney. It was about me, and it was already too late to turn back. The days following my confrontation with the producer felt like I was moving through a haze. I tried to focus on the work, recording, meetings, the endless stream of emails, but it all felt meaningless. Whitney's last recording echoed in my mind, and the weight of what I'd heard, of what I'd seen, started to suffocate me. But it wasn't just the whispers in the hallways or the cold atmosphere in the studio. It was Whitney. She was no longer the vibrant superstar I had once admired. There was something missing in her, something I couldn't explain. But I knew she was no longer the same person who had walked into that studio months before. I watched as she arrived for a session one afternoon. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though every step was a struggle. Her skin was pale, and the sparkle that once lit up her eyes was gone, replaced by an almost vacant look. I couldn't help but notice that she wasn't alone. She had a strange entourage around her now, people I had never seen before. They were quiet, watchful, always standing just a little too close, their eyes never leaving her. At first, I thought it was just paranoia, but the more I observed, the more I realized Whitney was surrounded by people who weren't there to support her. They were there to control her. It wasn't just the industry anymore. It was something deeper, something I couldn't name, but could feel crawling at the edges of my mind. I had been around long enough to know when someone was in trouble, and Whitney's condition was only getting worse. She'd stumble through the studio, barely able to finish a sentence. She wouldn't speak unless spoken to, and when she did, her words were incoherent, fragmented. The Whitney I knew, the powerhouse singer who commanded the stage, had faded into something unrecognizable. One evening, after a particularly rough session, she pulled me aside. I knew she was trying to say something, but the words wouldn't come out right. Her hands trembled as she reached for my arm. I didn't want this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But now it's too late. It's all too late. I didn't know how to respond. She was looking at me, almost pleading, but I couldn't help her. The truth was that no one could help her anymore. She had crossed the line, and the system had already taken what it needed. I thought I had time," she continued, her eyes glazed over. They won't let me go." I didn't ask who they were. I already knew. The people who controlled everything behind the scenes. The ones who used their power to drain artists like Whitney until there was nothing left, the ones who owned her. And now, they were taking her time. She was running out of it. The last words she spoke to me were those same ones she had whispered earlier. "You should leave, before it gets you too." She was shaking now, barely able to stand on her own. I could see her breaking down before my eyes. She wasn't just physically unwell, it was as if her very spirit was being drained from her. The rest of the night was a blur. The studio felt empty, even though people were still there, still working, still pretending. It was a shell of what it had once been, and Whitney was no longer a part of it. She had already become a memory, a fading star in a system that no longer had a place for her. The following week, she was gone. The studio tried to act like it was just another loss, just another piece of the puzzle. But I could see it. The way the producers and the higher-ups looked at each other. The way they whispered. They weren't mourning her loss. They were calculating how they would fill the void left by her absence. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment I knew the truth. Whitney wasn't just another casualty of fame. She had been sacrificed, and the system would continue. Moving on to the next star. It wasn't about her career or her legacy anymore. She was just another piece in the game, discarded when her time was up. But what terrified me the most? I was next. The system had already seen me, and once you're seen, there's no turning back. Her death wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something darker, something I couldn't run from. And now, I was trapped, just like Whitney had been. The days after Whitney's death felt like I was walking through a fog. The world kept turning. The music kept playing, and people acted like it was just another sad chapter in the endless cycle of fame. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse was coming. Something darker than I could have imagined. I didn't know it at the time, but her death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the system recalibrating, getting rid of what had become a liability. Whitney had served her purpose. She had given everything, and now her soul was part of the deal. I wasn't just watching her fade away. I was watching the entire industry feed off of her. The machine didn't mourn. It moved on. It always moved on. But the system wasn't done with me yet. The first sign that something was wrong came when I received an invitation to another one of those exclusive meetings. The ones I had tried so hard to avoid. But this time, there was no turning it down. I didn't know why I went. Maybe I thought I could get answers, or maybe I just couldn't escape. The room was filled with the usual suspects. Big-name producers, A&R reps, high-level executives. All of them wearing their best fake smiles, pretending everything was normal. but I could feel the tension in the air. No one was talking about Whitney, not directly, but you could feel it. They were all thinking about it. They were already calculating what came next. As I stood there, trying to blend in, I couldn't help but feel like a pawn in someone else's game. The conversations were insincere, the fake laughter loud, as if they were trying to convince themselves that everything was okay. But I wasn't fooled. The unease was palpable, and it wasn't just the loss of Whitney. It was something deeper. Then, one of the older producers, someone I had seen around but never really spoke to, pulled me aside. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his tone almost mockingly serious. "I don't know what's going on," I replied, feeling uneasy under his gaze. He smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was calculating. "That's because you haven't learned the truth. You think Whitney was the only one? You think she was the first?" He leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "The system, this machine, it takes, and it doesn't stop." I didn't know what to say. I could feel my stomach tighten, and a cold chill ran down my spine. The man's words were like a warning, a prophecy I wasn't ready to hear. He continued, "There's no such thing as a star without a price. You're part of it now. The moment you stepped into this world, you became part of the game. There's no escaping it. No one escapes it." I backed away from him, my heart racing. The walls were closing in. I couldn't breathe. I was trapped. Whitney had warned me, but I hadn't listened. Now it was too late. The industry had already marked me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fear gnawed at me like a living thing. I tried to push it out of my mind, tried to tell myself that it was all paranoia. But deep down, I knew the truth. The system had its claws in me now. And no matter what I did, I wasn't getting out. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice the signs. Subtle at first, but unmistakable. People started to avoid me. Producers who once spoke to me openly now looked away when I entered a room. Calls were made behind closed doors. It was like the moment Whitney had died, I had become a ghost, walking among the living. I was being cut out, erased. The higher-ups were already moving on to their next project, their next star, their next sacrifice. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the feeling that they were waiting for me. I could feel it. Their eyes on me and their hands reaching for me from the shadows. They wanted something from me. They weren't done with me. And when the time came, when they decided I was no longer useful, they would take from me just like they had taken from Whitney. I couldn't escape it. I tried to keep my head down, tried to pretend like I wasn't aware of what was happening around me, but the fear kept building, pressing down on me. It was suffocating. I knew I couldn't outrun it, and I couldn't hide. They would come for me. Then, one evening, I was called into a meeting, just like all those times before. Only this time, it wasn't business as usual. The room was darker, the air thicker. As I walked in, I saw the faces I had learned to recognize, the producers, the executives, the ones who pulled the strings from the shadows. They were all there, staring at me. One of them, a high-ranking producer I'd never spoken to before, stood and looked at me with an expression that sent a chill down my spine. "You've learned the rules of the game, haven't you?" he asked, his voice cold and flat. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I already knew what was coming. "We don't just make stars," he continued. "We make legends. And legends have a price. They always have, and they always will." The moment I heard those words, I knew. The final payback was here, and it was coming for me. It wasn't just about the music. It wasn't just about fame or legacy. It was about control. And once you're in the game, there's no way out. They were coming for me, and I couldn't stop it. Final payoff. The whispers never stopped. Whitney's last recording still echoed in my mind. Her voice a haunting reminder of what the industry takes from its stars. I thought I could escape, but I was wrong. The moment I stepped into this world, I was marked. Whitney had paid the price, and now it was my turn. I tried to run, tried to fight, but it was too late. The system doesn't let you go. It owns you. Every artist, every legend, every rising star, we're all part of it. We give everything, and in return, we get fame, we get power, but we lose ourselves. The truth is, there's no way out once they've seen you. Once you've been part of their game, you're never free. And as I look back, I realize Whitney didn't die that day. She was taken, and so was I.